Hey, so welcome to another episode of the Flow Tribe podcast. So in this episode, I am speaking with Maren Oslac. So Maren is a dance teacher. She's the founder of the Heart and Soul Dance Company. And she created this really amazing program where she helps people use the principles of partner dancing and apply those to their everyday lives, apply those principles, those lessons to their everyday lives to help them work through whatever it is they need to work through. We really connected on so many things in this conversation. I had such a good time. To be honest, I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I don't know very much about dance, other than, I guess, what I've seen on TV, on the dance shows that I watch. But what was amazing to me was that, you can connect with a person who you may not think you have that much in common. And then you start talking and you realize like, wow, we're basically connecting on the same things, just in a slightly different way, right? So for her, it's dance. For me, it's martial arts. But we drew so many parallels between the two. The combination of movement and creativity, right? So that you can tap into your physical self while tapping into your creative self. And when those two things combine, it can create something really powerful. It can also really create a very powerful state of flow, right? Which is something we also connected on. We connected on the fact that Maren's a very spiritual person, and she has some very regular spiritual practices that she uses, and we dove into that. So, you never know what you're going to get with these conversations, which is why I love this podcast so much. It allows me to connect with so many amazing people. So I'll stop talking now. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Maren Oslac. And I always like to start with an introduction. So how do I pronounce your name? Maren?
It's Maren.
Maren, okay.
Maren.
Perfect. Okay, so Maren, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And why don't we start by having you just kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Great. So my name is Maren Oslac. I am the founder and chief education officer at Heart and Soul Dance. And that's a transformational ballroom studio in the South Chicago suburbs. Actually, we're in Joliet, if you're familiar with the area, but it's a city a little bit southwest of the Chicago area. And one of the other things that I do, I've been a dancer, I've been an educator, and I've been an entrepreneur for the last 20 years. So it's my triple threat of business. And one of the things that I absolutely love to do, and where I'm kind of moving towards right now, is dance is been obviously a big part of my life. It's still a studio that I own. And so what I've been doing is I've been working with people and, like regular people, my students, and also with business owners to help them to disrupt business, the old business way of business being done, of push through lots of effort, make it happen, and apply the principles behind dancing with another person, where you actually surrender to that person and make something happen with them. So applying that to business and to life. So that's a little bit of me in a nutshell.
So just a quick background. What attracted you to dance? How'd you get started? Is it something you've been doing since you're a kid and you just never stopped? Was there a little bit of ups and downs? Like, I'd be curious to know what your background is a little bit as far as how you got into dance.
Yeah, that's actually, I like to say I tripped and fell into dance. I was a commercial photographer. I was in my 20s. I was a commercial photographer, and I was on a photo shoot in Oklahoma City. And we were shooting big rigs and their drivers, and we did a truck beauty calendar. And each night we were there for about a week, and it was me and three guys. It was at the time, a very male dominated industry. And so we would go to this country bar. That's kind of what there was at the time in Oklahoma City each night. And I saw country dancing, and I was like, what is that? I fell in love with it, and I couldn't get the guys to actually, join me. So I gave them a couple of extra drinks. I'm like, come on, let's try it. We were a hot mess. It was not a pretty thing. I think we pissed off a lot of the cowboys out there. But when I got back to Chicago, it's something that I wanted to do, and none of my friends would do it with me. And so I found the local country bar. I started going by myself. I was there 3, 4, 5 nights a week. I did all their free lessons. It wasn't enough. So then I went to the local ballroom studio and was like, teach me more, teach me more, teach me more. And within a few years, I was competing and teaching, and I was full on into, I was doing country, I was doing swing, I was doing ballroom, I was doing all of it, anything I could get my hands on. And eventually it became my full-time thing. I let go of the photography completely and dove into dance.
It's amazing. That's funny because I think your path is very similar to mine in the sense that I was working as a graphic designer in my 20s and fell into martial arts training. And within a couple of years started teaching and became obsessed with it. And then it became my career for 20 years. So yeah, it's funny how we can just fall into things sometimes without
It
even
is, and
knowing. Yeah.
I think that a lot of people, there are many people that aren't driven physically, but it sounds like you are. I know
Oh,
I
100%.
am.
Yeah.
That physical, like even when I was doing photography, I was a competitive swimmer. I was like, there's something always physical. I have to be doing something physical in my life, and it just, yeah, it resonated with me. And I think that martial arts and dance have a lot in common.
Oh, 100%. In fact, I think the main difference is just the objective of the movement, right? As where dance, the objective is non-violent, and where martial arts, but even in martial arts, I think there's a lot of martial arts practices. Like I'm sure you're aware of capoeira, which is
I
a Brazilian,
am.
yeah, the
And
Brazilian martial art.
isn't Aikido also?
Aikido, yeah, a little bit, but with capoeira, what's beautiful about that is that the background, the history of that is that the slaves back in Brazil, when they were under Portuguese rule, the slaves were forbidden from practicing fighting. And so what they did is they developed a style of fighting that looked like dance, so that when they were being observed, it just looked like they were dancing. But
Oh,
what they
wow.
were actually doing was disguising this training method in dance to learn how to fight.
Wow, that's amazing. I did not
Yeah,
know that.
there's an amazing history to it. And today I'd say that in some schools, they still practice the more martial aspect of it. But then some schools have gone much more into the dance aspect of it, where there's very little contact and it's very musical. And you even learn how to play those instruments as part of your training. And so they
Cool.
have something called a hoda, which is where they all get into a circle, very much like a breakdance circle or any other dance circle that you'd see. And then they each take their turn, and it's all about, practicing movement without making contact. So it's really interesting to watch them play, which is really what they're doing essentially. It's something I've dabbled into very, very, very little, but I've observed a lot of. But yeah, and even for me, like it got to a point where shadow boxing, where you're just kind of working on your own technique. I love just putting music on and just flowing and not even thinking about what I'm doing and just kind of see what comes out of that. And I think that there's a very strong relationship between martial arts and dance. Absolutely. I also think what you're touching on in terms of that need for something physical in your life is the combination. And I'm sure dance has that same element where, yes, there's that physical aspect to it, that release, but then there's also the perfection of technique, the perfection of ability, right? And setting those challenges for yourself where, hey, Kitty.
I have a friend. Sorry, let me
Oh,
excuse
no, it's fine. I was just telling my wife, I'm like, that's the new normal now, right? On these calls is because everyone's at home. So you'll have the kids run into the room, the cat jumps onto the table. So right on cue. Um, what I was saying is that I think with dance and martial arts is very similar is that, you'll have that technique that you can't do. And then you set your mind to that's my next challenge. And then you accomplish that challenge and you realize like, wow, a few weeks ago, I couldn't even do this and now I can. So what can I do next? And I think that mentally it's incredibly empowering to know that you can set these goals for yourself. And by putting in the work, you're able to achieve them. So I think that's probably something you've encountered quite a bit for both yourself and your students, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we always do, part of the reason that I call us a transformational ballroom studio, and it's not just, we're not about just teaching people how to dance. Because one of the things that we do with all of our students is we sit down with them to set their goals. What is it that why are they walking through our door? Right? A lot of the chain studios, what they have is they have a program that's a preset program that they take people through. And there's a lot of benefits to that. And what we found for us is that if you treat somebody like an individual and you work with them on their goals and what they're moving to, you can actually help them to do that in other places in their lives. You can help them to grow as people and not just learn to dance, right? So there's a both and what you're talking about, it's very much that of when we do that in one place in our lives, right? And so we have this passion for something and we follow that passion. It's amazing how that exponentially works out into other aspects in our lives. Like other things start to come to pass. We're like, wow, I've been working on that for a long time. And that just showed up, it's like all of that stuff. So I love what you were talking about, and having that place where we have the passion that actually drives us to put the work in, because it does take work. And it doesn't have to be hard, something that's hard. That's the difference that I see, is when I'm passionate about something and when I'm excited about it, like my dancing, then I'll show up to it on a regular basis. And I have that goal and I know where I'm going. So yeah, when we work with our students, that's very much what we do, is we kind of dig around, and we're like, where's the passion? What is it that excited you about coming into the studio? And then we, for lack of a better term, we exploit it, right? In the best way possible, so that they achieve their goals. And then they find that all of a domino effect, other things in their lives are also showing up and changing.
Yeah. And I'd say also from my own experience as a teacher of martial arts, is that those people that are walking through your studio, I'm sure of the 10 that walk in, maybe 1 or 2 would have any interest in competing or taking it seriously, as where the rest are really just there to express their movement and to express themselves physically. And in the end, I think what you're saying, how their goals in the studio can help them, in real life or the rest of their lives, is probably so much more important than any trophy or any type of competition that they might want to enter. Although it's a great goal, and I think when people do take that step, there's definitely benefits to that. But I think for me, I've gained way more out of some of the people I've trained that had absolutely no competitive intention when they came through the door, because I felt like some of them were actually coming in to learn skills that they needed in their lives. Right? Versus competition, you're switching on the ego. There's a lot more to it sometimes. And so I love that. I love using it in a way that benefits people beyond the dance studio or beyond the studio in general.
Yeah, that's definitely been a goal of mine from when I first opened the studio. It's interesting because dance studios tend to come in two flavors, I suppose. Is you've got your competitive studios and you've got your social studios, and we bridge that gap because we don't make an assumption when someone walks through the door. We talk to them, we talk about their goals, and then they get put with somebody that's going to, if they're a social dancer and that's what they want to do, they'll work with a coach that is more social oriented and will help them towards those goals. So yeah, it very much is, for me, why we're all here, right? That's what it comes down to, is we're all on the planet for a reason, and it encompasses a lot of different, there's an arts side, there's a science side, there's all these aspects to us, but they're all still part of why we're here. And so for us to be one size fits all, that doesn't speak to anybody's reason for being here. It just is trying to fit you into a cookie cutter mold, right? And as you can hear, I have a strong spiritual side as well. And so for me, the dance is very much more than just learning patterns or learning choreography. It's really about the communication and delving into the self-awareness and the deeper you. And there are some people that have no interest in that, and they're having fun and they're doing their social dancing or they're competing. And we have a lot of people who, they learn a little bit about themselves and about who they are in the world and where they're going and what they want to be doing, and where dance fits in with that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'd also add to that I think what you're saying from a spiritual side, or even just from a holistic approach to life, is that I think everyone needs some sort of physical expression, but also everyone needs some sort of creative expression. And I think the beauty of dance maybe is that you can bring those two together in this one art form, right? Where, you know, someone who's going to the gym every day, they're not really tapping into that creative expression so much. And sitting at, you know, an easel or whatever other type of art form you could explore, you're not really getting that physical side, right? And I would think dance kind of brings those together in a really positive way.
It really does. And you had mentioned something, you know, like with the martial arts when we were talking about it, there's there's a freedom of expression. And if we take that we were talking about the effort and the work, right? So if we take that effort and the work and we put that in and we get to the point where, and I think most people can find something in their life that they've put so much work into that they do it naturally, right? They do it without thinking about it. And you get to that point with a movement, an expression of movement, whether it's martial arts or whether it's dance, and you can do that, and you can now bring that creativity back in, or bring that spark into it, and it becomes a very much a place of self-expression. And when you've put the discipline, when there's a discipline behind it, it's a little bit different than just complete free form. Benefits to complete free form too, not saying that there aren't, but and there's that slight shift of like a deep knowing of a skill with creativity on top of it, or embedded, or it weaved into it. It just is something that's it's magical, really. It is.
Yeah, and I think what also happens, and again, I can only speak from the martial arts perspective, is what you're talking about is really that combination of that strong foundation that you need to build, I believe, before you can dive too deep into the creative expression. Because it's great to be creative, and it's great to, you know, if someone walks in and they've never done any training and they suddenly just decide to free flow, it's going to look kind of terrible for most people. And especially from a martial arts perspective, is there will not be any strength to their movement because they haven't put in the work. You know, if you want your technique to look the way it should and to be as effective as it should be, it takes hours and hours and thousands of repetitions for your body to be able to perform that movement with the ease that it should be able to perform it, and with the minimal amount of effort. You know, I always talk about martial arts, like the further you go down that path, it's about creating the maximum amount of power with the minimal amount of effort, right? Because the body is just so used to that movement that you no longer need to think. You no longer need to overwork. You can just do it, and it just comes out naturally. And I think what you're saying too is once you have that foundation of strength, that basic foundation of movement, now you can explore some really powerful creativity because you'll be capable of it. Right? Is where if you've never done dance before and you just start moving to music, great, it's fun, you'll love it. But if you're really looking to create something powerful, you have to invest the work to be able to get to that stage. Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that. And one of the joys for me, and the reason that I have chosen to do ballroom, or what I call couples dancing, because it could be swing or salsa or any of those forms. There's lots of forms of it. But it's dancing with another, is for that very reason. What we're talking about just there is the depth that you build. So you build this foundation, right? And now you're talking about two people building the foundation, and there's an aspect of building your own technique and your own ability and your own balance and your own arm lines, and you know, all of the things that go into dance. And then there's the aspect of the communication with another person, and it's a complete back and forth. We use the terms leader and follower, and I love that for a couple of reasons. One of them is inside of us, we all have a leader and follower. We could call it masculine energy, feminine energy, yin, yang, whatever we want, right? And in our culture, one of the things that really, the reason that I have followed along and I dove so deeply into dance, into couples dance, is because I had a very, very developed masculine side. My leader was gung ho. I knew how to lead. I knew how to do. I knew how to go. I knew how to make things happen, right? I was a force to be reckoned with. And when I was introduced to couples dancing, I was fascinated with this following thing, which meant complete surrender into the moment. And there was a part of me that really wanted to dismiss it, that said, no, that's not powerful. And there was another part of me that said, that, I want that. And I had set a goal, we talked about goals, right? I set a goal for myself to become the best follower ever. I wanted to be able to follow anyone doing anything. I was going to master this skill. And I did. And what I found is that I grew as a person because there's a side of me that I had really shunned and said, no, you're not valuable. Society doesn't value, I'm not going to value you. And when I brought it to the table and I started exploring it, and the outward expression is the back and forth that I see, that I experience in dancing with another person, in understanding that it truly is a full-on conversation between the leader and the follower. And then I realized that's going on inside of me. And also it happens with me in my business. It happens with me in spirit. It happens with me everywhere. And I thought, oh my God, this is a path that people, they need this information. They need to be able to understand a little bit of this, not the mastery of dance part, but if I can bring a couple of those aspects of dance into people's lives to help them to honor both of those parts of themselves, that is valuable in this community, in this country right now. I think across the world right now, but specifically in our United States, where we value that strong leadership, and we don't always value that strong followership.
Wow, that just takes it into a complete different direction, right? But in a good way. No, in a very, very good way. I think that's extremely important, what you're saying. And I think strong leaders often negate that part of themselves or suppress that part of themselves because they think they see it as a weakness, right? I think people who have that strong need to lead often think that any type of being a follower is weakness, right? But I think it's not at all. I mean, it can be. Obviously, I think there are people who only follow and aren't willing to stand up for themselves and aren't willing to take the lead when necessary. But I think, like you said, finding the balance. And I love that you dove into it, right? This was a new energy to you. This was a new way of perceiving yourself. And yet, rather than resist it, I think you took a kind of leadership approach to it and decided to take it on as a challenge, which is really interesting. It's like, I'm going to be the best follower ever. It's like, wait, how does that work, right? How do you do that? But I think dance is probably one of the ways to do it. I think if you try to take that approach to life, it might be very abstract and it might be difficult to find ways to do that in life in general. But I think dance maybe gave you a very clear example of what it is to follow. Like in this relationship with my partner, there can only be one of each. If we both lead, this isn't going to work. And if we both follow, this isn't going to work, right? So you have to make that decision. And I think dance kind of does that for you, right? In the sense that we don't have to argue about this. You lead, I follow. That's it. I think that's amazing. So I'd be curious to know, so we talked briefly before about the program that you've kind of developed where you use the lessons learned in dance and help people translate them into other aspects of their lives. And I'd like you to maybe talk even a little bit more about that, because I think it's fascinating. And I would love to really dive into this idea of where in life do you need to lead and when do you need to follow? And what are some other parallels that you found between dance and life that you're able to help people with both by teaching them dance? So if you want to maybe dive into that a little bit, I'd be really interested to learn more about it.
Yeah. I think you use the word abstract, and I think that had I not had a very concrete path, because that was who I was, that was how I learned, and that's how I knew how to be. I needed a concrete path to get to from A to B, right? There's a linear path from A to B, and that's how you get there. So I was gifted this path of like, okay, here you go, here's dance. Have at. You can use the skills that you already have mastered in order to master a new skill, which is much more, it is an abstract. And the empowering part or the powerful part of following is presence. And so when you're in presence, you can be led in different directions. So I found that one, like you just said, one does not work without the other. And unfortunately, there's a quote that says, if power leads and wisdom follows, we will all be lost. If wisdom leads and power follows, then that's our kind of our saving grace, right? That's where the beauty all shows up. And that's what I found, is that there is this constant back and forth. The misunderstanding that happens in a lead follow relationship, in a dance relationship, is that one person is telling and the other person is following, is just doing the bidding. And that's not what happens at all. Ask anybody who's actually gotten into dance and really has gotten into that conversation that happens between two people, because you're creating something together. And what I found in my journey is that I have, as a follower, as much say as the leader does. And the leader has to listen as much as he does. And I say he just because traditional roles, the leader is male and the follower is female. And at our studio, we work with female. I'm a female leader, right? So when I teach people, I lead. So excuse my pronouns. But that conversation, it has to be a two-way street. So the followers are listening and talking, and the leaders are listening and talking. They just do it differently, and both are equally valued. And that's the piece that I come to life with. And when you're talking about like, so now what? How do I help people? Because I have this information. I have the experience. They won't have the experience because they won't spend 20 years learning a skill like I did. And there are certainly things over 20 minutes or over, several sessions or over a year of working together that I can give to people, so that they can start to experience that for themselves and find those places in themselves where they learn about what it's like for them to be a follower. What does fellowship mean? What does it mean for you in life? What does it mean for you? What does it mean to be present and feel the nudge of life in a certain direction, and to follow that thread and see where it goes, kind of like a little detective, right? So those are the things that kind of light me up and get me excited about working with people who don't have a dance background and don't need to have a dance background.
So here's something that just kind of popped in, and I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on this. So like I told you before we started recording, I've never practiced any type of dance, but I've been watching dance for a very long time, especially So You Think You Can Dance. Because I think that was, for most people, their entryway into the world of dance. I mean, before that, unless you were attending some sort of dance competition, like there was nowhere to watch dance, right? And something that came up a lot, because you're talking about leaders and followers in ballroom dance, for example. And something that I constantly remember seeing was when the judges would speak to the dancers afterwards. So if we say that the leader is the male role and the follower is the female role, the female is often the star, right? She's the one who's being showcased, while the male is more or less the support that allows her to do what she does. And I think that might actually be incredibly valuable as a lesson for leaders and followers, where a good leader does not look to take the spotlight. A good leader does not look to be the one who everyone pays attention to. It's rather to make the people around you better, right? And I think that I just clicked to that, where, and again, and also the follower cannot simply allow themselves to be led, in the sense that there's a lot of work involved as the follower in a dance duo. Like that person has just as much training involved, as much work has to be invested into her skill to be able to match the leader's skill, right? And vice versa. So I think that the parallels here are really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was just, I think there's a really interesting lesson there. So I'd be curious to know from a teaching perspective, do you have, is there like a built program around this? Like, how do you use this therapeutically by helping people through dance to improve the other aspects of their lives? Like, can you dive into that a little bit?
Sure. I just have to say real quickly, I think that your insight was very profound and very true. That the leader's role is, and if you look at it in society, the leader's role is to support those around him. Very much so. In dance, we call him the frame, and the follower is the picture, and the leader is the frame, right? So the leader shines creates a space for the follower to shine, and that's really what our role as leaders in the world is. And when we get the despots of the world that want to shine the light on them, right? They want to be the picture and the frame. I think that's where we get into some trouble, right? So really, I mean, to address your question, one of the first things that we work with is I do have a program, and I take people through. So my framework is, if you think of it, music is our source, right? So it's the why behind why we dance. We wouldn't dance if there wasn't music going on. Even when you were talking about shadow boxing, you said, I'm going to put on some music and shadow box, right? So that's what drives us. So I think of that as the deep why. So I go through that of like, what's your music, right? So those are my parallels. What's your music? We find the deep why. And then I go through with people how they see themselves as leaders and followers. Like what does that mean for them? And we discover that, and we start to work through that, and we play with it. I don't even want to use the word work, because we really get to play with what it's like inside of you to be a leader, to be a follower. What does that mean? All of those things. And I have actual things that I work through with people, right? And then we look at what might want to change with that. And just that discovery process, there are huge ahas for people. And I've watched people change overnight and become, like all of a sudden they were struggling with, like, say, even a financial issue. They're struggling with a financial issue, and all of a sudden they find a resolution because they were able to drop in and just be present in the moment and feel and understand that nudge of like, ooh, I followed for a moment. I followed the thread instead of trying to push and make something happen. I was able to surrender in the moment, and then like things appear in their lives. It's been a very fun journey for me.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on is really important, is this idea of using, so let's say flow. We talked about flow states earlier, and flow. And I think that that's what happens when you allow yourself to let go, right? And to explore something new, and to just kind of escape into whatever it is you're doing, such as dance. And in that moment, there is a neurochemical shift that happens, physically speaking, right? And I think that's where the problem solving occurs, right? Because as long as you're living in your conscious mind, then you're just going to kind of repeat those same things over and over and over again, right? And that's where you're going to get caught in these negative thought loops, where it just makes it very difficult to think and to problem solve. And then when you let go, it's like when people say sleep on it, right? Because in sleep, you let go, and then you wake up with this whole new perspective on things. But I think same way that sometimes you go to the gym feeling terrible, you leave the gym feeling great. Why? For a couple of reasons. But I think what you're tapping into is exactly that, is by allowing yourself this freedom of exploring movement, exploring this expression of self, you allow your mind to shift and to explore new thought patterns, and to explore even new levels of consciousness that can help you figure out your financial issues, figure out your relationship problems, or whatever that is. And I'm sure you've experienced that over and over again, right?
Yeah. And, I actually will take people beyond the figuring out part. because what I found is that I don't have to figure it out, that answers will show up if I allow them to. And that's the place where I think that most people are stuck, is that they think they have to have the answers for everything. How do I do this? How do I do that? How do I, like, so my coach has something he calls his how extinguisher. Not your job to figure it out. You don't need to do it. Not your job, right? You get to your deep why, your why and your when, what you want and when it's going to happen, and then stay present, dropped in, and allow for the who and the how to show up. But you have to stay present with your deep why, and it's kind of like, it's taking the goal setting, the masculine goal setting, and adding the feminine element to it, of the listening and showing up, instead of here's my goal and I'm just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing to make it. It's here's my goal and I'm going to hold that intention with everything that I have, and follow the threads of the things that are showing up in my life. And there's the following aspect, and it will lead me to who's going to help me with it and how it's going to happen, and the way, and what I found is the way that things actually happen are way better than I could have imagined, right? Like, the universe is so freaking amazing. And I think that my puny little self is going to match what she could do for me. Heck no.
Yeah, we could actually, why don't we could go there. So what you're really talking about is what I consider this collective knowledge, right? This kind of collective consciousness that I believe is what flow gives us access to.
Very much.
I think any very, very creative person has experienced at some point in their lives that moment where an idea comes to you, but it does not feel like it came from you. It feels like it came from outside of you, as if it was gifted to you, right? It's like, hello, here, I'm going to share this with you so that you can share it with others, so that you can take ownership for it if you want. But in the end, it almost feels like it just came to you from somewhere,
like
right?
It came
and
through you.
Like it came through you. Absolutely. You're just the conduit for this knowledge, which was already there, right? It's already there. I think all of the knowledge of the universe is accessible. But again, it's about putting in the work first to be able to gain access to that knowledge, right? As where, you can't simply just sit there and expect all of the knowledge of the universe to suddenly channel through you. I don't think that's how it works. I think it's a combination of put in the work, open your mind, and then allow it to happen. So we're going to both be part of this retreat coming up at the end of August called the WOW Retreat. And I've interviewed Stephanie Allen, who's the organizer of the retreat. And we've already talked about that on a previous episode. And I'm really excited about it. I think what they're putting together is something pretty amazing. They're opening it up virtually for the first time, which is great because it allows people like you and me to participate in a way that we wouldn't be able to. So maybe talk a little bit about what you'll be presenting as part of this retreat so that people who want to join can know what to expect.
Yeah, so I'm going to do just a brief, I think it's like a 45-minute, maybe an hour session, kind of scratching the surface of what we've talked about today, of having people experience a little bit of movement and how that could shift something within them, so that they could get more out of life, whatever their goal is. And obviously anyone who's showing up will have their own reasons for showing up. So applying that in their lives. And we're going to explore a couple different energies and, like what movement in each of those energies will look like. We're not going to do any type of partner dancing because most people don't have a partner. So it's not about learning partner dancing. It's really about the inner, that we're going to be working on the inner level. And we, like, as we were talking about, like that, the physical movement, the outer reflects the inner. So we'll be working with actual physical movement and then also talking and reflecting onto the inner and how we experience that.
And I'd be curious, that's amazing. I think there's going to be so much good stuff presented during this retreat. I think it's going to be a very unique combination of minds and a unique combination of approaches I think ultimately what comes down to the same thing, right? Which is finding ways to connect with your most powerful self, with your most peaceful self, with the self that allows you to progress in life and to kind of unlock that potential that we all have. And I'd be curious to know also, where do you see that, for me as well, like what I'll be teaching will really be that combination of movement and breath. For me, breathing has become the gateway to all of this. It's how I discovered spirituality. It's how I discovered this ability to take control of the physical self in a way that I never thought was possible, to take control of the mental self, to take control of the nervous system, all of those things. And I'd be curious to know how you discovered that relationship between movement, both the physical and the mental, and what are some of the practices that you have in your daily life that allow you to connect with spirit and that allow you to kind of nurture that relationship?
That's a great question. So I spend, let's see, when I first wake up in the morning, I have about an hour that I dedicate to spirit. So I've got some spiritual practices and then a meditation that I do. I've got a background with a Sufi teacher, so I do several of the Sufi meditations and practices, and then I work with. I had done a session with Joe Dispenza a while back, and I usually will do one or two of his meditations every week. So I kind of mix that up, but I keep the time consistent. So I show up. I have an evening business. Running a studio is an evening business. So I have nighttime hours, like we're working with students from like 4 to 10 p.m. or, 3 to 10 p.m. And I still get up at about 6 so that I can do my spiritual practices are from 6:30 to 7:30. And I keep that sacred every morning. I will usually do something physical, whether it's an actual just a HIIT workout, high intensity training workout, or a yoga practice, or a bar practice, something physical. And so those are the two things that I do first thing in the morning, so that I have both the conversation with spirit and the conversation with my body, right? And that's kind of how I blend those, is I make sure that I do those. Plus every day I'm teaching dance in some way, shape, or form. So I have that conversation with my body as well.
And at what point in your life, so you discovered dance, you said in your 20s, at what point in your life did this connection to spirit come along? This way of communicating with spirit? When did that come along? Was it something you discovered through dance? Was it something you discovered separately and then kind of brought them together? I'd just really be curious to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, my mom got me into something called self-actualization when I was about 8 years old. My cat is nudging me. See, she wants to be a part of it. So I was fairly young, and at the time I was swimming. So my self-expression was swimming, and I thought that I was going to be an Olympic swimmer. I had an opportunity to work with an Olympic coach, and my parents decided they wanted me to have a normal life, so said no to that. But it did lead me to have to delve really far deep and get to know what spirit. And it was interesting that both of those happen around the same time, right? So I got to experience my conversation with spirit and learning about myself through most of my life were these parallel tracks. It wasn't until recently, though, that I started to be more open about the fact that I did have a relationship with spirit. I just was like, that's my personal space and we'll just keep it over here. And then I would say in the last 10 years or so, I've started to realize it's my entire life. It's like, it's my conversation in my business. It's my conversation with my husband. It's my conversation, like it's all spirit. And why am I keeping it over here? And when I did that, when I started to be like, okay, this is who I am and how I work with my life, that's when stuff started to come through me. Like you said, you realize it's like it didn't come from me, it came through me. And that's really where the dance's life, dance's life came out and started to be like, ooh, I can help impact people.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something interesting, which is for a long time, spirit was something you did for yourself, but you didn't necessarily share it with the rest of your life, right? The people around you. And it's almost this thing and that was honestly the same for me. I discovered meditation probably a few years after I discovered martial arts. It was just kind of the path that led me there. But for a long time, that practice was very personal. I didn't share it with others. I didn't talk about it. It was something I did for myself. But I also think that more recently, and I think maybe it's through podcasts like this and the amount of content that is out there for people to explore now compared to maybe 10, 20 years ago, is I think now these conversations are much easier to have because I think more and more people are, first of all, more and more people have these practices as part of their lives. I think more and more people accept that this can be a very powerful tool to help them in their lives, like the amount of therapies and the amount of ways that people are using these practices to help others has increased quite a bit. You talked about Dr. Joe Dispenza. I read one of his books, and I mean, his approach is incredible, right? He's got this what I liked about his approach was there's a lot of science involved. It's quantum science, and you have to have some amount of belief there if you want to actually buy into it. But it's there. I think he's taken a spiritual but also scientific approach. And I think that the more we're capable of bridging that gap between science and spirit, the more we're opening up those worlds to both sides of that puzzle, right? Because I think there are people that are very strong on the spiritual side, but sometimes they lose that connection to the real world. And they go, and that's fine for them. But what I'm saying is, as a teacher, if you're trying to help as many people as possible, if you go too far in either direction, you're going to lose the middle, right? And I think that's where most people live. So I think the more that we can find ways to bridge those gaps, to bring spirit and dance together, to bring spirit and other aspects of life that are more normal together, the more people we're going to be able to touch and the more people we're going to be able to help.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's interesting because the other person who's presenting is Daniel Goodenough. And he's been my spiritual teacher for 30, 20, a long time, 20 to 30 years, I'm not sure, since the late 90s, mid 90s, since the mid 90s. And he talks about the art, science, and spirituality, right? The three of them coming together. And it really is, because as we were talking about, it's like if you just have the physical, if you're just going and working out, right, and you're running on the treadmill, you're missing out on the art side of things. So we all have all three of those. We need the science. We need that physical, we're doing something and it's scientifically proven, or what, however that is, that very concrete. We need the artistic, creative, and we need the spiritual, that's grounding. So we need that trigram. We need all three of those. And so I look forward to your conversation with him as well. I know hopefully he'll get on here and be able to chat with you and do a little podcast as well.
Yeah, I hope so too. But if not, people can definitely connect with him during the event. And details for the event will be part of the notes for this episode, as well as the episode with Stephanie Allen. And so I think, to close this off, how can people connect with you? I think you've got some pretty amazing stuff going on, and I'd love for people to be able to explore what you do. So how can people connect with you?
They can visit either of my websites. They can visit heartsouldance.com, which is my studio, and it's soul like the sole of your shoe, SOLE. So I'm sure we'll have that link somewhere. Or they can visit my personal website, which is marenoslac.com, MarenOslac.com. So either one of those, I'd love to see you at either of those. And I do have a book coming out, actually. I'm part of a book of 20 women. It's called Unstoppable Women. And so that would be another way to connect with me, is pick up the book and read my snippet in there. So
Amazing. This was amazing. Honestly, I really, really loved this conversation. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I think it went extremely well. And thank you so much for taking the time.
I had a blast. Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to seeing you more at the conference.
Absolutely.